Hi, Dr. Carlos Todd here, and welcome to another video where we talk about how to fight less, love more. So, what are we talking about today? We're talking about passive aggressive coworkers. And how do you manage your anger around passive aggressive coworkers? And then another video we'll talk about how not to be passive aggressive. But today we're going to talk a little bit about how do you manage and deal with coworkers or employees who are passive aggressive. So the title of the video is Passive Aggressive Coworkers: How to Manage Your Anger. So for a lot of folks, it's a lot easier to deal with anger when it's overt, right? When the person's just, or this conflict, like people are just saying things directly to you. I don't like you. I don't care about you. That's relatively easy to manage. But when things are covert, right? When the person is not necessarily responding in ways I will describe in a bit, it becomes a little bit harder to deal with. When you're scratching your head, it's like creating some confusion because in your mind, you don't really know what's going on, right? It creates confusion, tension. You don't know how to respond to this person. It creates a certain amount of emotional frustration. And that in itself, over time, can wear you down. It's a kind of manipulation, right? Manipulators try to communicate to you without communicating to you that what you think is real is not real. And you see the thing before your eyes. You see that person is doing and saying things that are clearly an issue, but in some ways they're denying it, so it becomes another issue for you to be able to manage because it's hard to define. So let's talk a little bit about what passive aggressive behavior looks like. It looks like a few things. I'll list them and then we'll talk about it a little bit, right? It looks like is ultimately indirect hostility. It looks like sarcasm. It looks like avoidance. It looks like silent treatment. It looks like delayed responses, right? You ask them something, they don't respond to you. Backhanded comments. Oh yeah, you're a great employee, huh? And intentionally, withholding information. And the hard part is that it's so ambiguous that the person is very easily, they're gonna deny it, right? Well, I never said anything to her or him. I followed the rules, and they did, but they're delayed. I've seen this in situations where an employer wants to get rid of a person and they just try to create a hostile environment. Hostile in the sense like, they won't respond to your emails, right? You send them messages, they don't respond to you. They speak in sarcastic tones to you, but it's never like directly saying or doing the thing like you are a bad employee. You are, so nobody can blame them. But you feel it. You feel the hostility. You feel the tension, and you know that this is a problem. And so I'm here to tell you that when you feel it, it's real, it's true, it's not a figment of your imagination. It is actually happening. And this is something when I'm working with people who are employees in particular, who are dealing with supervisors, who are engaging in a passive aggressive behavior. It is exhausting. There are actually cases where people have to take time off from work where emotionally it drains them. They can't necessarily say that this person does X, Y, and Z directly, but they can tell like they're having problems with sleep, they're feeling some degree of confusion. Sometimes depression sets in for that individual because the employer or other employees are engaging in passive aggressive behavior that drains that individual. What is the second point here? Why passive aggression is so emotionally triggering? It creates a sense of emotional uncertainty. It messes with your sense of reality. Your brain senses tension, but there's no direct conversation. You can't really say that this is exactly what's happening. So what does it lead to? It leads you to overthink situations like, did this happen? Did that happen? And now you're confused. So the frustration grows, the anxiety grows, the resentment grows, and this actually can affect your productivity and your desire, as I said earlier, to engage in work. And that obviously becomes a problem that could affect your livelihood. And so you start asking yourself questions in your head like, was it intentional? Yeah. In my opinion, it is. But these questions come up in your head. Are they upset with me? Am I overreacting? And so this kind of resentment over time can really kind of get into your brain and create some problems for you. I try to tell folks again and again, yes, it creates paranoia, like real paranoia. People get into work and they're very hypervigilant about what is happening. The paranoia is real. There's no if, ands, or buts about it. It creates real exhaustion for that individual. Passive aggression often escalates other people's anger. One of the reasons passive aggression becomes so toxic is because this indirect behavior pulls other people into the emotional escalation, eventually those people become reactive too. They become defensive or emotionally flooded. And those people in this case will be you. Eventually, for some people, they can't take it any longer and they react. And then the other person is like, yep, there you go. You're being that person. But they've pushed you to a point where you feel as though you don't have any choice but to react. So you become reactive, become defensive, the chief of which I think is emotionally flooded, and that has implications for your health and well-being also. And then the other person now who's been passive aggressive, they're appearing calm, right? Like, what's wrong with you? Why'd you send that nasty email? Because you couldn't take it anymore. You just went off. And they seem like the calm one, and you seem like the reactive one. Not good. It's a kind of emotional baiting, and you need to be able to understand when this is happening so that you can respond a little bit differently. Respond in a way where you're taking better care of yourself, where you are solidifying in your mind that what you think is really happening is actually happening. It's not a figment of your imagination. Because once you can solidify in your mind that this is actually happening, I think your response is going to be a lot. You want to make sure that you don't fall into those emotional traps, as I said earlier, the baiting, the emotional traps. And also, you don't want to fall into a situation where you are the one who looks like the problem. You need to be able to gain control of yourself. Whatever mechanisms you have in the workplace, those may be allies that you can communicate with. It may be documenting what is happening, right? It may be pausing before you respond to certain emails. Anytime that you have an emotional response to something, a heavy physical or emotional response, sit with it for a little bit before you do or say anything. What is it that you should not do? One of the biggest mistakes people make in emotionally charged environments like these is to become explosive. You do not want to do that. You do not want to engage in any public confrontations, emotional outbursts, being sarcastic back to the individual, gossiping, retaliation of any sort. The problem here is that at the end of the day, when they're doing their stuff, you have an explosive response and then you lose credibility. And that now becomes an HR issue. It ruins your reputation. And then you find yourself in a situation where you've taught yourself to be emotionally impulsive. You don't really want that. Why is it that some people use passive aggression? What is the reason for them using passive aggression? Some people just don't know how to communicate directly, and that their way of doing things, their way of responding to things is to be aggressive. Some people avoid confrontation. Some people fear conflict. They seem strong to you, but in reality it's a very weak response because they fear conflict. They fear vulnerability. So instead of expressing things openly, they do these covert things, hoping that you explode and they can wash their hands of that situation. So they are the weak ones, right? And if you fall into the trap, you're the weak one too. You don't want to fall in. So what do? How do you handle these passive aggressive co-workers, bosses, and so on? Well, there are a number of things to consider. One is that the goal is not to be emotionally reactive. The goal is to stay calm. I know it's not easy to stay calm, and I can say this here, stay calm, but I get that it's not easy. Sometimes you kind of, I've heard some of my clients say to me, if I focus on my family and the fact that I have to take care of them, and so any strong emotional reaction that I have is going to damage them. And before I do something crazy, I think about them. And so that kind of helps to slow my response a little bit. The other thing is that you want to stay regulated. And part of the way that you stay regulated for some people is making sure that you do some things other than the homework cycle, spending time with friends. Sometimes you may have a friend that you communicate with to share with them how you're feeling or what you're needing or what your concerns are. Those kinds of things keep in mind. Helpful approaches may be clarify expectation. Ask the question, what are you expecting from me in this situation? What do you need? They say they don't know, then if it's a work context, you give what the work requires, what the job requires. If they're not laying it out to you, you may have to pull up a copy of that or ask HR for a job description so you're very clear about what are the expectations in that situation. If you expect that the other person, you observe that the other person is responding in a negative way, a sarcastic way, you want to approach it calmly. I feel like your response to me is a bit sarcastic. They're going to deny it, we know that, but you've let them know where you stand. And letting them know where you stand is oftentimes helpful in kind of slowing these negative responses to things because you're onto them. Using direct questions, asking, hey, this is what I've noticed, say it directly. You can be direct without being nasty. I think one of the biggest things that one can do is to document these patterns. Everybody has access to technology. I'm not telling you to record anybody, especially in a work context, but you can record yourself. You can record in, this situation happened today with Mary or John, and this is what happened from my perspective. And over time, a pattern is going to emerge that I think might be useful to be aware of. One of the most powerful things you can do is to remove the emotional intensity from the situation. I've said in other videos that sometimes these things can seem deeply personal, but a lot of times these individuals are behaving the way that they're behaving because they lack certain skills in terms of how to respond in situations. And so at the end of the day, yes, it feels like they're responding in a negative way. They seem to have a certain strength, but it really is a weakness because they don't know how to effectively respond in certain situations. Your goal is to maintain a neutral tone. Your goal is to set boundaries. Your goal is to be emotionally professional as much as you can, and then finally document. Protect your emotional energy is so important because high stress levels, emotional explosion at some point. And so the next point here is really making sure that you protect your emotional energy at the end of the day. If you're carrying this stress over time without addressing it yourself and without gaining control of your own self, you have an explosive episode, like I said earlier, they're going to point the finger at you. You're the one who fell off the handle. This is making sure that you focus on your job performance, making sure that you focus on regulation. And I do have people on my caseload that I'm working with that they are dealing with stressors at work, and just the idea of being able to come and talk to someone about it in itself is helpful because it helps ground you into realizing that what you're experiencing is real, the validation of another person. So I hope I've given you some ideas to kind of think about in terms of managing passive aggressive coworkers or a supervisor or boss. And so that's something to consider. If you want more strategies on how to address anger, click the links below from masteringanger.com. If you're having some relationship issues and you want courses on how to address conflict in your relationship, my book Fight Plan is another option, which is in the link below. And also our couples courses, they're there too in the links below. So that's something I want you to kind of keep in mind until the next video. And remember, the goal here is to fight less, love more. Take care.